back to the Big Splash. Thank you all for tuning in all day. We've got an exciting session this afternoon. Our next speaker is Dr. Tom Cavanaugh. He's the Vice Provost for Digital Learning at the University of Central Florida. And Tom and his team, along with the Arizona State University crew, have been tremendous resources, especially among the leadership teams as we have transitioned to Canvas, and appreciate all the time and generosity that you and your team have given us. This session will be moderated by Dr. Stephanie Harris, who's the Interim Department Chair of International Studies. And Stephanie is also a member of our LMS Advisory Committee as we transition to Canvas. So a quick bio on Tom, which definitely doesn't capture it all, and then we'll move into session logistics. Tom, as I mentioned, is the Vice Provost for Digital Learning at UCF, and in this role, he oversees the distance learning strategy, policies, and practices of one of the nation's largest universities, with us being among the other. Tom is also an award-winning instructional designer, program manager, and administrator, and he serves on a number of state and national online learning boards. His research interests include e-learning, technical communication, and the societal influences of technology on education, training, culture, and commerce. Tom will present, and then we will have some time for Q&A at the end of the session, which Stephanie will lead us through. And we may actually shift some of the questions that we got from Allison Hall at ASU over to Tom. We had quite a few coming in at the end that we may give to Tom to answer. And this session will be recorded, and we'll post a link to the recording on the Office for Academic Innovation YouTube page within the next week. We love your questions. You can use TAMU Big Splash on Twitter, or you can email us at academicinnovation@tamu.edu. And if we don't get to your questions today, we'll make sure we email you an answer in the coming days. And just Tom will talk about the BlendFlex model at UCF, and as with ASU, it's not yet been implemented. So just making sure that everybody knows we're all moving towards this new model together in the next coming weeks. And with that, Tom, we'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jocelyn. Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure. I hope your event's going well. We migrated to Canvas in 2012, and it was not something you want to do every day. Let's just put it that way, moving to a new LMS. But yeah, we've been there for a while and we've been happy. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And because I've had issues in the past of going into presentation mode, I'm just going to go ahead and share it in the kind of the developer view. So I hope you can see that. Okay. So the subject I'm going to talk about is this thing we're calling BlendFlex, and you may be wondering what the heck is BlendFlex. I'll define that and sort of explain what that means for us. But let me first begin with a little bit of background about UCF, in case you're not familiar with us. Our overall enrollment is not very different from A&M's. I think we kind of jockey for that #2 spot behind ASU for largest school in the country. So this past fall we had 69,500 plus students, 13,000 faculty and staff, 224 degree programs. We are officially a Hispanic serving institution. We got that designation a couple of years ago. 47% plus minority, 54.9% female, and we have over 22% of our students are over the age 25. A lot of our online students, though, the demographics skew even more female, even older, even more non-traditional. And those SAT and ACT and GPA scores are for our incoming freshman class, not necessarily for our transfer population. We are the largest transfer receiving institution in the country. We get more than 10,000 transfer students a year, and it's a big part of our academic access mission. So a little bit about online learning at UCF, just to kind of put some of this into context. In the last academic year, the 1920 academic year, 49.5% almost of the total university credit hours were either online or blended. That's a lot when you have 70,000 students. To have almost half of your credit hours be completely online or blended. 33% were fully online. So the majority of those credit hours that are either online or blended are fully online. 86.6% of our students last year took at least one online or blended course. And you can see on the bottom left how that breaks down between undergraduate and graduates. And then almost 75% of all of our students took at least one fully online course. And you can see how that breaks down between undergrad and grad. So when the pandemic struck, for example, our students adjusted fairly well, at least to the modality issues. The losing jobs and other kinds of challenges that they had were different. But when it came to kind of knowing how to use the LMS and navigating an online environment, that wasn't as big a challenge for our students as it might have been for some of the faculty who weren't doing a lot online, because it's kind of hard to get through UCF without touching the LMS in some meaningful way. Last year, we're looking at almost 87% of our students had some online or blended class. Okay. We had a number of colleges and schools, those are the left-hand side of this chart, that had more than 50% of their credit hours online or blended last year. And the colleges and schools on the right are those that had between 25 and 49% of their credit hours online last year. And you can see that our Rosen College of Hospitality Management is one of the best in the world. It's a separate campus, co-located down by a lot of the attractions here in Orlando. Did over 80% of its credit hours last year online or blended. And the vast majority of that was blended. And that's a whole separate story, but it's fascinating about how they've adopted blended learning to support their particular pedagogy and their mission. This is a credit hour growth by modality over the past several years at UCF. And going from the bottom up, our classroom face-to-face credit hours, our blended learning, which combines face-to-face and online, like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, you will meet face-to-face once. And then the next two are these active and video modalities, where we're transitioning away in a lot of cases from our large lecture capture kinds of delivery to something that's a little more intentional in a kind of active blended mode. And then on top of that is our web-based instruction through the LMS, through Canvas. And you can see where the growth of the university has been for the past several years. The face-to-face credit hours have been either flat or actually declining slightly. And then most of the growth has been in our fully online and blended modalities. So let's talk a little bit about the fall context, which leads into this whole concept of blend flex. So we know for fall, we're going to have the maximum flexibility for instructional delivery, because we kind of don't know everything that's coming. We're going to have to maintain these physical distancing guidelines. Every classroom on campus, I imagine it's the same in College Station, has what we are calling COVID capacities, which represents something like 25 to 30% of the actual capacity of the room. So in lecture halls, they've actually roped off the stadium seats where you cannot sit in them, so to maintain 6 feet between everybody. And in other classrooms, they've actually taken seats out of the classrooms and ensured that there's 6 feet between all of these chairs. So we just can't put more than some, percentage, 25, 30% of the actual enrollment of the course in the room at the time. So we have to maintain these guidelines. We know we don't have enough rooms where we could just take these sections and put them in a bigger space so that everybody can still fit in the room and maintain the physical distance. There's only a couple of cases where we're going to be able to do that. We just don't have enough giant rooms all over campus where we can move everything to bigger spaces. We had at one point talked about going into our basketball arena and doing stuff outside, and it just wasn't practical. And we also know we don't want to reduce the enrollment of these courses to the new COVID capacity. First of all, that's terrible for academic access. But secondly, not great for tuition revenue either, if it's only 25% of the enrollment that you can allow in. And it's hard when like schools like ours that are really large, when you want to try and have this educational access as much as possible. Okay. Further, we know we don't want to create some sort of instructional class system where if multiple students want to have this in-class experience, and we know that the underclass, the freshmen, the first time in college students do, that some can have it and some can't, in some sort of inequitable distribution of that experience. So we don't want to have, okay, well, the first 20 people who sign up for this course get to be face-to-face and everybody else has to be online because we just don't have enough seats. That just doesn't seem equitable because of the way students register and the kind of school that we want to be. So we want to try and come up with a solution to that if possible. And we also strongly suspect that this fall, at any given time, at any given class, kind of at any point in the term, any number of students could be out in quarantine or self-isolating or even sick. So they could be rotating in and out of the class on a 2 to 3 week cycle at any given point. And especially if you have a large class, you could have any number of students coming in and out at any point. How can you ensure that those students can maintain their academic progress without falling too far behind? That was another factor we wanted to try and consider. And so a mantra that I've been trying to live by and encouraging the team here to live by is that the more complex the context, the simpler the solution needs to be. So we've tried to come up with some sort of a Swiss Army knife solution as much as possible. Now, it's not perfect, it's not a panacea, but I think it affords us the most flexibility given all of this crazy context we're facing for the fall. And that's something we've dubbed the BlendFlex model. So what is that? First of all, the definition I'm going to give is kind of our definition. We didn't make up the term BlendFlex. We actually read it in an Inside Higher Ed article. There were some others, the University of Maryland, and some folks that have been using this term. I don't think their implementation is exactly the same as the way we've done it. And ironically, that article in Inside Higher Ed that referenced BlendFlex said that the schools that were using it were inspired by the University of Central Florida, some stuff we were doing, which was a surprise to us. we didn't know what we had done to inspire them. But we give a lot of tours on campus, and we've published and presented a lot on our blended learning model, which is different than this, what I'm going to say to you today. So I suspect it had something to do with what we've done with blended in the past. But this definition for BlendFlex, regardless of what you may have read elsewhere, is kind of what we've defined for ourselves to meet the particular needs of this pandemic response. So here's kind of what it is. The idea is it's very much like HyFlex. If you're familiar with HyFlex, HyFlex means that the student has complete agency to participate in the course however they want, meaning that they can come to class if they want, or they can participate online if they want. And that can change on a session by session basis throughout the term. Sometimes they can come to face-to-face, sometimes they can come online. In many ways, it's set up to be sort of asynchronous. It's been really espoused and pioneered by Brian Beatty at San Francisco State University. And Brian talks a lot about the asynchronous aspect of that, but there are synchronous components. And this is kind of a derivation of that HyFlex model with some notable exceptions. So in our model of BlendFlex, the student does not have absolute agency to come to class whenever they want. The idea is that they are assigned a day that is their day in class. So in a typical Monday, Wednesday, Friday kind of course schedule, I might be told, Tom, you can come on Monday. And then that means on Wednesday and Friday, I participate remotely. And that another group of students, another third of the class, will participate on Wednesday. And then the final third of the class will be present physically on Friday. So why do we tell students they can only come one time per week? It's to manage the physical distancing requirements of our COVID capacity classrooms. Rather than say you can just show up whenever you want, say we had 50% of the class show up or more. Well, we can only accommodate 25 to 30% of the class in that room. That suddenly puts the faculty in the position of having to police attendance or enrollment caps in the space. And I personally don't think that's fair to put faculty in that position of trying to be the enforcer of room capacity. They have enough going on this semester trying to prep for this kind of crazy delivery environment, and then how they're going to deliver it to two different audiences at the same time. I don't think we should ask them to have to stand at the door and count heads and then tell some students to go away. So this really is to manage that attendance, that room capacity. So the students, so just to kind of give you an example to make sure this is really clear. Say you have a class of 100 students, and the room can only hold a third of those. So on Monday, 33 students are told they can attend. A different group of 33 students can attend in person on Wednesday, and then the final 34 students can attend on Friday. And then the rest participate remotely. That can be a synchronous, or it can be asynchronous. It can be synchronously participation, or it can be asynchronously participation, depending upon the faculty member. We're encouraging them to record everything, because we know that, especially if students have to self-isolate, or they have challenges with work schedules or family schedules, and we know that a lot of parents are going to have their children at home this next semester, that it's hard sometimes maybe to make that 10 o'clock in the morning class if they're going to make it. So we're encouraging them to record it so it can be viewed and engaged with asynchronously just as validly as if they did it synchronously. Okay, so let's go into a little of the details. Some considerations. What about Tuesday, Thursday classes, Tom? There's only two, and we've talked about, maybe there's a Saturday class too that gets added, a Saturday session. And well, what about students who work on Saturdays? Well, then it may just be a virtual course for them. But the faculty have a lot of autonomy to kind of manage that. We also have some very large sections. A lot of these lecture capture courses that we've been converting to this blended active modality are quite large, and it doesn't make sense necessarily because we just don't have space to do a BlendFlex model for some of these really large courses. So it might just make more sense for them to be split into different meeting patterns. But if you're only going to be meeting once a month or something because of the size of the course and the room that we have, it might just make more sense for those to be turned into a fully remote course. And in fact, I think that's what's being done for most of those larger courses. So as I said, students cannot choose which day to attend in person. That's a question. Well, what if they said that, well, I can't come Monday, I'm going to come Wednesday instead? The BlendFlex model says you can't, because we have to manage the capacity of the room on Wednesday too. And if you come, you're going to be one too many people in the room. So their only option to attend is on their assigned day. Faculty can decide, based upon their own attendance policies, whether or not they should require a student to attend on the day that they're assigned. Our provost has hinted strongly, this is not the time to have really rigorous attendance policies. We don't want to have students feel like they have to come in if they don't feel well, because there's a required attendance policy, for example. I wouldn't be surprised if we have some sort of an edict that comes out of academic affairs to that effect, but to date, it's mostly just been sort of I strongly encourage sort of messaging coming out of the provost's office. So given that, if a faculty member wants to, they can allow a student to do the whole thing remotely if they wanted to, or in any given week be completely remote. So they don't necessarily have to come, depending upon the policy of the individual faculty member. The idea behind it is to minimize the mental load and the extra work on faculty. The idea is the faculty member should still be able to come in and lecture, and it works really best in a lecture kind of a pedagogy, and use the same syllabi, use the same lesson planning, and just teach like they normally would in a classroom. And the only thing different is that the students in front of them changes. So it's a different group Monday from Wednesday from Friday. There's some technology things I have to talk about, and there's some minor practice issues that I'll talk about in a second. But the idea is we don't want to create a whole bunch of extra work for faculty. We're trying to minimize that as much as possible. And as I said, if it's done through Zoom or Panopto, those are our two platforms on campus that are both pushed out through Canvas. A real-time video feed should be available, as well as a recording for asynchronous consumption of that video later. So a little bit about the technology in the room. We're fortunate in that we, for many years, have had a CIO, and then the folks who ran our AV group have done a good job in putting very consistent technology. It's basically one platform in all of our classrooms with minor variations. So we have a Crestron control system. Every room's got a computer. We all have projectors and large monitors. Every room's got a document camera, and many of them have microphones, and in some cases, in the larger spaces, assisted listening for room amplification. So the room that you're looking at here is the UCF classroom. Right now, most of those seats are actually physically roped off, and it's only every 6 feet is there a seat available that students can sit in, and that would be the COVID capacity of that room. We have added, we went to the provost's office and we requested some strategic investment to add technology, but it wasn't much because of the good work over the many years that the CIO and others have done in these rooms. It's something like $100,000 that we've asked for to equip the rooms that we think we're going to need to equip for BlendFlex. So it's like 320 rooms that we're anticipating. And we're adding a USB webcam, a USB microphone like the one you see pictured here, a capture card for video, audio cable, and we have to program the Crestron to handle all of this, especially the integration of Zoom. And we've done some testing, and it's worked well. The faculty wearing a mask, because everybody's gonna have to wear a mask on campus, behind the podium speaking, the microphone picks them up. You can see what they're doing, and it seems to work pretty well. So a few advantages. Faculty don't have to, as I said, significantly modify their pedagogy, kind of only minor adjustments to classroom practice. I'll talk about what those are in a moment. As I said, most classrooms kind of already equipped with the basic tech. If you would rather bring in your own personal laptop, you can. Just through an HDMI cable, you can plug in and just do everything you need to do from your laptop in the classroom. If the faculty or students can't be on campus, if the faculty has to self-isolate, for example, or is high risk suddenly for whatever reason, they can easily move the class to fully remote if possible, because all of the infrastructure is there and they're already delivering it remotely 2/3 of the time to any given cohort of students. We also know that at UCF, the decision was made that after Thanksgiving, we're not coming back to campus. So everything is online for that final week and then for finals. And these courses should transition fairly smoothly after that Thanksgiving break, because they're already delivering so much of it online to so many students. And we've also found in kind of previous HyFlex implementations. So I mentioned these large lecture capture courses that we've done primarily in the College of Business and some in the College of Engineering, where the students can either watch the lectures online or come to class and participate in person, and they can kind of do that at their discretion. What we have found is that over time, more and more students elect to attend remotely as opposed to coming in person. Students being students are going to probably gravitate towards convenience, right? And given the kind of public health considerations of the COVID situation right now, may not be a bad thing if students kind of elected to do some of this remotely voluntarily in some of these Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for example, sections, to create maybe even a little more space. That might not be a terrible thing. And then active learning, as I mentioned, this works really well, I think, for a lecture-based kind of pedagogy where you stand and you kind of deliver. Active learning, which we've been pushing a lot and doing all kinds of training and encouragement of faculty for active learning, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. But I think it's going to be more of a challenge in the physical space. Because if you want students in groups working together and then doing report outs, kind of working collectively, sharing screens and devices, it's it's really hard to do when you have to have 6 feet between everybody. In some ways, active learning might be easier facilitated online, maybe something through Zoom breakout groups. And you could even bridge the in-class participants with the remote participants live through Zoom breakout groups, assuming that the students who are in the classroom bring their devices, their laptops or something, they could participate with those in the room and those outside the room on whatever the particular activity is. So I think in some ways, active learning might actually work better through technology given our circumstances than it does in the classroom. Now, as I said, it's not a panacea. There are limitations. Lab sections just aren't going to work. Anything that requires you to physically do something in a space is probably still going to require you to be in a physical space, whether you're pouring chemicals on the bench, or we've got an optics school, for example, and if you're shooting lasers at something, it's going to be hard to do that in BlendFlex, where you're remote for 2/3 of the time. Some of the performance courses in visual arts or in performance arts, maybe some of the clinical experiences where, like, I'm thinking like physical therapy or something, where you have to actually put hands on a human being or others to do the work that you have to do. It's going to be hard, and so there are plans for that with extra PPE and other kinds of things that BlendFlex is not the solution for. As I mentioned, large courses that would require you to meet less than once a week might not be a great solution for this, because then kind of what's the point? It's better probably just to design a really meaningful, engaging online experience for those students. Faculty this is a face-to-face solution. I've been asked by faculty, well, how am I going to make this work in my online class? And the answer is, well, you don't, because it's designed to bridge the face-to-face with the online. If it's fully online, you don't need BlendFlex, because you've got all of the other tools and training that we provide for that, whether that's the LMS or the conferencing software, or whether that's Zoom or Panopto. Accessibility concerns have to be forefront. Students who are hearing impaired or visually impaired, we're going to have to make sure that they have the proper accommodations. We are working with our Student Accessibility Services Office to make sure that they understand what's coming. And they've already been doing a ton of work with Zoom and other things through captioning and sign language interpreters and others in classes already. And I did mention that there are some extra costs that we've had to incur for equipment and support. So I mentioned that there are some practices that the faculty are going to probably have to change, but nothing, in my opinion, that's core or that requires a ton of work. So, like, one of them is, do I use Zoom or Panopto? Because they're both integrated into the Crestron, into the classroom computer. We've got a training program that we've developed. It takes maybe an hour or two to go through. And one of the things that's addressed is how to choose what is the right platform for you. So just a quick rule of thumb is that if your course is smaller and it involves a lot of discussion, Zoom tends to work better for that. You can do whiteboards and breakout groups and other kinds of things. And I'm probably not saying anything you all don't already know. But if the course is large, and we have some that are large, or our particular Zoom license is capped at 300 per course session. So if it's over 300, or if it's just mostly lecture, then you may want to consider Panopto, because Panopto doesn't necessarily have the same kinds of limitations as Zoom, and it handles those numbers really, really well. The faculty need to know how to kind of come in and set up and record in the classroom and on the computer. And if they want to, switch inputs and displays, like between maybe a laptop and their regular computer, like the classroom computer, or maybe different inputs, like we've got a document camera, and some classrooms have 2 cameras. You just have to kind of understand the advanced settings in Zoom, and it's not hard, but they just need to know what those are. I mentioned the document camera. So if faculty like to get in front of the classroom and write on the whiteboard, unfortunately, that's just not going to be possible, because the webcam will not pick it up. It's not enough contrast, and those cameras are just not high def enough to do that. So if they want to do that kind of instruction, they're going to have to use the document camera, and every classroom has one. And so they can just write on the paper under the document camera so that the remote audience can see it. And then that can be projected with just basically a press of a button in the classroom, so that the classroom students still had the experience as if he or she, the faculty, were writing on the front of the board, but they're really writing instead under the document camera. And then a benefit we've heard from some faculty is that they can take those pages where they've written their notes and their lecture notes, scan them, upload them into Canvas later for study guides for students so that they can refer to them. Especially helpful for students who may not be there live. We're encouraging faculty that they should put as many assignments and as exams and quizzes online as possible, especially if we have to go fully remote again. And also because we know that students are going to be coming in and out, and if you've got a test that you can only take sitting in the classroom, you are going to have students who cannot do it, who are absent, and you're going to have to deal with that. And probably the easiest way to handle that is just do it online, and we can help you with that. We've got proctoring software and all the other things to help. Faculty will be kind of physically constrained, unfortunately, to about a 5 or 6 foot range behind the podium. And that's because that's where the camera and the microphone are to pick them up. And as I said, we've done some tests with wearing masks, backed up as far away from both of those as possible, kind of with your back against the wall. And you can still hear and see fine. It works. But the further you wander away from the camera and more importantly, the microphone, the less intelligible you are, and the softer it gets, and students won't be able to hear you. So for faculty who like to be mobile and move around the room, this will feel somewhat limiting for them because they won't be able to. They'll be somewhat tethered to that spot. I was asked a question by a faculty the other day. We were doing a panel on this, and it was, well, how will the remote audience, the remote students, hear questions in the classroom? And the answer was not exactly satisfactory. It's that they probably won't. The faculty will probably have to repeat the question for the remote audience. We have very few classrooms where we have we have microphones kind of built in to pick up the classroom. And that's a double-edged sword, right? Because if you did have microphones in the classroom to pick up the questions, it would also pick up every chair squeak and whisper that the students would be doing in the room, and that can be super distracting. So we've solved that in some spaces in the past with some of these catchbox microphones where they can be shared, but that's sort of the last thing we want to do right now, is have students throwing microphones across the room, talking into them and sharing them with each other, if we could even buy them now. So really the answer is the faculty are probably going to have to repeat the questions for the students who are remote. And then kind of finally, we are suggesting that faculty use asynchronous discussion as much as possible, so that everyone can participate, even though the 2/3 of the course that aren't there at any given time. I've gotten some questions from faculty like, well, do I have to just lecture as if I would Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or can I do something else? Like, can I flip it and record my lectures and then repeat the discussions with each group Monday, Wednesday, Friday? And the answer is, that's awesome if you want to do that. Yeah, you can, of course you can do that. That's cool. But that's an awful lot of extra work for you to kind of redesign your pedagogy and go to the trouble of recording all your lectures and stuff. And I don't want to imply that that's required of all faculty, because I know that not every faculty member is going to have the capacity to do that extra work. But if they want to take it upon themselves, we will support the heck out of them and help them produce those things and work with them through instructional design and video production and everything else, if that's what they want to do. But sort of at a bare minimum, the idea is you can just come in, do what you've always done, and not have to have a kind of terrible burden on your workload as you're managing all of the other things that you have to manage for this fall. So that's BlendFlex. There's a link here at the bottom of the page, and I can provide this to Jocelyn and Stephanie to share with everyone later. That will take you to this page on our site. There are a couple of videos. The video on the left is sort of an overview of BlendFlex for faculty. And on the right, it's a little more of a deep dive into kind of the technical aspect of implementing BlendFlex in the classroom, like how to do the settings in Zoom and some other things. And then a lot of the same information that I covered in this presentation is here, along with some pictures of what to expect in the classroom. And so you're welcome to check that out. It's out on the public web right now. So with that, I would be happy to try to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Tom. That was really terrific and super helpful as we all embark on the fall semester and not sure what we're going to face. You know, a point that you brought out that I think is really important is that whether it's BlendFlex or if we're just talking about a face-to-face class that, you know, has a room capacity large enough for everyone potentially to be there Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but we'll have students who opt to participate remotely. So you're always going to have this, is a very specific type of a course. So it's neither fully in person nor fully online, nor is it really a blended course, which assumes that kids are either always in the classroom and then sometimes online. And I think the phrase you used was, how are you going to deliver to two audiences simultaneously, right? You have an audience in front of you and you have an audience who are participating, in our case, mostly, I think, through Zoom. And so a lot of the questions that came in before the session and that have now come in as you were speaking, I think are largely addressing that question. Right? How do we deal with these two audiences at the same time? And so one question that came up, for example, had to do with how one would be able to get face-to-face students and online students to collaborate effectively. You know, taking the example of a course that's not a full lecture course with 100 students in it where the professor is accustomed to lecturing, but there might be other forms of collaboration that are going on. How might we facilitate those kind of interactions? And one question or one faculty member asked whether it might be productive to build teams within the class, pairing someone in the room with somebody who is online.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea. I haven't been asked that specifically about the teams and the pairing. Our faculty have a lot of experience, most of them with like groups, because we do have some large classes, and that's a way to make a large class feel small. And sometimes students think they're in a class of 10 and it's a class of 300 because they just kind of see their group and it feels a lot more intimate for them. And I could see that strategy being applied here. But one thing to kind of keep in mind, you're absolutely right. You got two different student populations that you're supporting simultaneously. And to be frank, this is sort of new for us. We've done lecture capture, but that's mostly faculty come in and sort of lecture, and it gets recorded, and it's not interactive or live in that way. Students could maybe watch it live, but it's more of a broadcast kind of model than it is an interactive model. And what we're encouraging here is maybe something a little bit different. So it does require a little bit of looking out of both eyes here, where it's really easy to privilege the audience in front of you because they're right in front of you. And that's natural. But it does, I think, fall on the faculty member to every so often just take a step back and check the Zoom platform in this case, and just make sure that there's no questions, give people an opportunity to raise their hand and ask a question, to make sure that they're engaged and that they're getting their queries addressed. I've heard some strategies come up from our instructional design team where, well, it's possible you could do like icebreakers. Somebody was talking about, I think it's something that they read in a Derek Bruff blog where you could use Post-it notes, for example. Like if you're using an icebreaker, and students can come up and individually place things in the front of the room with proper distance and put some Post-it notes up, but then you could simulate that online through like the chat function and use the chat postings as kind of a virtual Post-it note, and then kind of bridge that where both audiences can participate in this icebreaker. I mentioned active learning as one example where you could potentially break the students out into groups through Zoom using the the kind of the group function, and involve students who are in the room with students who are remote, synchronously and live. And then you could even decide who reports out at any given time. I think you're just limited by your imagination on how you might want to try to bridge these two student populations. And I would say keep it simple. That's something we try to really encourage faculty to remember, because it can be easy to get ambitious too, and then try to do too much. And sometimes it takes a couple of iterations before you get good at something. And this is the first time that our faculty are doing anything like this. And we kind of don't want to overwhelm them with too much. Like, you need to do this, this, and this, and this. It's like, it's enough. I mean, it's already enough saying you got to stand behind the podium, and you got to use the document camera, and you got to do these settings in Zoom. We're going to have a job aid on the podium with reminders of all of these steps and little graphics and things to help them. But even so, it's funny, I got asked, what is BlendFlex? Is BlendFlex a modality? And no, I'm trying to be really clear. It's not a modality. And I'm probably regretting I called it BlendFlex now, because we have a blended learning modality here that we actually don't call blended learning. We call it mixed mode because we started doing it before the term blended learning came around. But it mixes face-to-face and online. And that we do in a very intentional way, as you described. Part of it's face-to-face, part of it is online, and you meet maybe face-to-face once a week. Our hope is we don't do BlendFlex after the pandemic. This is really to solve a very specific challenge we are facing right now. I hope we can fill our rooms again. We don't have to have 6 feet between people. We don't have to manage. What a problem to have. Too many students want to come in, right? So I'm hoping that we can kind of solve this right now, have the best possible experience for the students and the faculty, but then we can turn the page and go back to doing what we think we do really, really well.
Yeah. Well, here at A&M, we will have some courses that are in this BlendFlex model of platooning different populations from the course roster in on certain days of the week. But in effect, every face-to-face class is going to be facing this, because every student potentially might be registered in a face-to-face class that they are not able to attend.
Right.
For whatever reason. And so all of the faculty who will be teaching face-to-face are thinking about some of these issues. You had mentioned one of the questions that came in had to do with managing attendance. And I know in your presentation you talked about the kind of feelers coming out of attendance being probably not the number one priority. Certainly not in terms of mandating a student to be in the room, right? That is nothing that anybody wants to do. But what about someone who's teaching a course where attendance is an integral part of the course, so that whether you were in the room or you were attending remotely, you're still attending, right? That still counts as attendance. And so the question was, what kind of strategies or mechanisms might be built in, and how one would do this with two different sets, again, our two audiences?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Canvas has some tools like the roster tool that you can use for attendance taking. And I wonder if that can potentially be leveraged. I can't say I'm an expert at it, but that might be a kind of an embedded out of the box tool that could be used. There are other tools out there from vendor solutions for attendance, things like Top Hat or others that will claim to help you manage your attendance, and I'm pretty sure that they can be leveraged both from the in-class environment to the virtual environment. Is that sort of the crux of your question about sort of how would you manage that technically, or are you talking about more of a kind of
There wasn't
strategy?
specific. It's one of the
Yeah.
questions that came in before the presentation. So
Yeah.
I know in Zoom too, you can check when did people log in and when did they
Right.
leave the meeting. So there would be a way to bring attendance in for that. Other questions that came up just had to do with the technology itself. You addressed a little bit. One had, what recommendations for faculty who are wearing face masks, that they could still be understood through Zoom, and then students requiring it. You addressed a little bit some of the audio issues that might be part of the room.
Mm-hmm.
In that student questions, for example, might not be picked up by this microphone that is there. If you had any other strategies about sort of managing the audio between the two sides.
Well, I would say that if you had to pick one over the other, audio is going to be more important than video. Audio is, you can forgive some bad video. Unless it's something like if you're writing in a document camera and you're doing formulas and you can't read the numbers, that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
But in general, a principle is that the audio you tend to be more forgiving of the visuals than you are of the audio. So I would say that the audio needs to be as good as it can be. Those microphones that I showed on the presentation were pretty effective, but we've done some tests in rooms where maybe we don't have that, and it's just a webcam with an embedded mic, and it's worked fairly well. I've been on the receiving end with somebody on the other side of campus speaking through a mask 5 feet away through just a webcam microphone, and I can hear them. I can understand what they're saying. So I've been pleasantly surprised. Now that may need to be tweaked and massaged a little in some settings of volume and things, but I think as long as you don't get too far away from it, you should be okay. Now we do have some edge cases that we know we're going to have to deal with. Like, so for example, our dance and performing arts groups are asking us about, well, we want the camera turned away from the podium into the room with the microphone facing that way, because we want to be able to share what's happening in the room, not behind the podium. And so we're going to do that, but we haven't tested that as much to see how that will work. And some faculty, I think, have ambitions that they're going to be able to record like lab discussions and things, and I'm just frankly not sure how effective that'll be in a lab environment. I'm sort of recommending against that as a ultimate solution. If you want to do it as a supplement, maybe it can be a bonus, but I wouldn't rely upon it in a lab environment.
Have you, I'm sure you have, I have are getting a lot of questions from faculty looking for help solving a certain issue, or let's come up with a creative solution. I'm wondering what you're hearing from students. If students are voicing sort of obstacles that might present to them, or this will be a new learning strategy for them as well. If there are maybe advice or tips you could give based on feedback you're getting from students as UCF prepares for that, of how faculty can sort of get out ahead of some of the student concerns around this new learning method.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. My headset died while I was speaking. So that can happen too, apparently.
Yeah. We have a question about that.
Really? So I'm sorry, Stephanie, could you just repeat your question?
No, the question really just came down to what concerns are you hearing from the student side? If there's particular obstacles that they are already voicing concerns about that we might might not have thought of ourselves, and just so that we can try to get ahead of them.
Yeah, it's interesting that we've done our own surveys, and then our student government did actually a really good survey of their own constituents about this whole situation and about their attitudes towards the fall. At the risk of reductionism, it seems to fall into kind of binary camps where you got a bunch of students who are concerned about coming back. You have a bunch of students who want to be back on campus. And there's not a lot of sort of in the middle there. It seems to be these separated perceptions. And so the students that want to be back on campus, I think, are looking for things like this, which I think is the main way we're going to be back on campus. A couple of quick numbers: about a third of all of our sections this fall are going to have some face-to-face component, whether that's fully face-to-face or blended. It's like 1,400 in some sections that are face-to-face and 350 or something that are blended. So it's like over between 1,700 and 1,800 sections currently scheduled to be on campus. So that's a third of our total section offering. Well, that's only 10.5% of the credit hours. So it's a third of the sections, but 10.5% of the credit hours. So we're basically 90% online this fall.
Right.
And it's because we've roped off these seats, and the rooms can only hold 25% of the capacity. So the rooms are going to be substantially empty. And so we're trying to give students as much of an on-campus experience for those courses where it really makes sense for it to be on campus. For our first time in college students, we know that freshman year, I know you guys experience this, I'm sure, is so critical towards retention and ultimately graduating, having that engaging first year. And so we're trying to give the students as much input and meet those needs as much as we possibly can. But it's interesting because we have 70,000 students, which means we have a lot of opinions out there. And I run the risk of occasionally, I do this to myself, and I'll search Reddit for different keywords. And so there was some stuff about BlendFlex out on Reddit that before, because everything's moving 100 miles an hour, before we had gotten a lot of our messaging out, and we've done some work with our news and information department, but before we could get in front of all of that, BlendFlex kind of leaked out as a term. And there was some uninformed Reddit forums about what it is and what it was perceived to be. And we had to respond to that. So you want to make sure that students are informed that you're meeting their particular needs, but it's not homogenous. It's very heterogeneous kind of a population that we're trying to serve here.
Maybe one final question. I think we're getting towards the end of our time. It goes specifically to group work, how that might be performed under this BlendFlex model. Basically, would group work maybe be based on a certain day of the week, on a cohort someone is assigned to, and whether or not there's a best practice to ensure participation in group work, again, within the cohorts or across the two audiences.
Well, I would ask the faculty member who's asking that question, what have they done in the classroom with group work, and how much of those practices could be migrated to a virtual or a bridged environment? Because honestly, what we have found through 20 years of online learning is that good instruction is good instruction. And the things that work well in a classroom tend to translate well online if you take advantage of the particular affordances of online. But things I'm talking about are, objectives that align with outcomes and assessments, caring about students and being responsive in feedback, and having structure in your course and clear expectations and things like that, sort of the meta kind of practices. And if you can establish those kinds of things in group work that work in a classroom environment, I would strongly suspect that they work in this kind of environment as well. You kind of have to get facile with the technology to make sure that that doesn't become a barrier to implementing good pedagogy. But I think all the things that work well in a face-to-face group environment, whether that's making sure that the students have assigned roles, or that everybody is involved, or maybe you do anonymous peer assessment with each of the group members, whatever they are, all that can be accomplished through the same environment, as long as you kind of understand the technology and can connect them together.
I think there actually will be a pretty strong role for technology among the students in the room, whether they're on Zoom themselves on their phones and then having micro discussions, because you won't even be able to have a discussion with somebody 6 feet away, right?
Wow.
You'd almost have to do that through Zoom or some kind of chat yourself. So.
Yeah, and we know that it's like 99% of our students show up with like 3 devices.
Yeah.
You know, there's a laptop and a cell phone and a tablet. Most of them have a Fitbit or Apple Watch or something. I mean, it's crazy. So being connected, at least at a university, I know that there are genuine digital divide issues at other kinds of schools that need to be addressed. But for here, for the most part, the students have access to the technology. I'll make one comment about students and technology. And since you are doing a big splash for Canvas, and maybe you discovered this, but one of the things that we discovered after the migration to fully remote in the spring was that the digital divide issues became much more acute for some students, particularly when it came to bandwidth issues. And so like if a student was in a rural environment and they were home now, they weren't on campus, and you take away all the issues with they just don't have webcams, or they left their laptop in the dorm because we had to bug out over spring break and they just left all their stuff in their dorms, they did their textbooks or whatever. But one example was in the exams and quizzes within Canvas, when faculty had set them up as one question at a time, which is a legitimate way to kind of help prevent academic integrity issues, randomized questions, and you present them one at a time. The internet was so slow for some of these students that it would take so long to load each question. By the time ran out on those tests, the questions hadn't all loaded. They hadn't gotten through them all. We were getting multiple calls at our help desk about that. So we were starting to recommend to faculty, until we get through this, we recommend that you show all your questions at once. So they load all at once, the students can go through them, and they weren't happy about it. And I understand why, but the alternative is fielding a bunch of complaints from students that they're going to contact a faculty member first, probably, and then they're going to call us. So until we get through this, I would say, randomize them from a larger pool, but show them all at once, and you can mitigate some of those connectivity issues.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you both. This was so insightful, and I've learned a lot. I've taken a ton of notes. I appreciate the presentation, Tom, and the way you facilitated the dialogue. Stephanie, was fantastic. Just want to send a quick thanks to our partners in this event: the Center for Teaching Excellence, Disability Resources, Provost Communications, Provost IT Office, TTVN for the live stream, and Canvas and LinkedIn Learning. And then of course, a special thanks to our LMS Advisory Committee, who is with us in our Canvas transition over the next year. We will send out a brief survey and would appreciate some feedback so that we can continue to offer some programming and resources such as this in the future. Thank you so much, Tom and Stephanie. And next up, if you're staying with us, we've got a session on accessibility. Take care.
Thanks.